Good evening, folks. Hope everyone's had a great weekend. I'm Jarrett Roser for Louisiana versus all y'all. He's Chance Hester for Louisiana Football Report. Some of you, actually a lot of y'all, tuned into our bracket reaction show last week, so appreciate you for checking us out then, and appreciate you for tuning in now. We have a week of playoff action under our belts and some really notable outcomes, great performances, all those things already in the books. And as I was working on some of the bracket prediction stuff last week, I also realized how quickly some of these intriguing matchups start to kind of hit the bracket line fast and furious here in the second round, and then certainly the quarters. And so a lot to recap, a lot to look forward to. Chance, how are you doing this weekend, man? You guys at Catholic High had a nice bye to enjoy in the first round, but I know you had eyes all over the state.
Man, it was a good weekend. I got a rare perfect football weekend. So a perfect football weekend for me is a Bears win, an LSU win, and a Jacksonville Jaguars win. So bye week, you count that as a win, right? If you earn one of those. LSU ekes out a 1-point win over the Hogs, and surprisingly, the Jaguars beat the Chargers by 30 today because the NFL is impossible to predict. So perfect football weekend for me. And lots of good football around the state on Thursday and Friday night. You got everything you'd expect and a little bit more. You got upsets, blowouts, and a little bit of overtime sprinkled in. So you got basically a mixed bag of what you'd expect when the playoffs start and teams throw their best shot at each other, knowing that they don't have a guaranteed game next week. And so you got exactly what you wanted with some of these results that we'll talk about.
And some notable history in some spots, too. I threw on a black and gold T-shirt today, not for the Saints or Grambling or Steelers or whoever, but for Haynes Academy getting their first playoff win in school history this past Friday. And so we'll have some instances like that as we go through the different divisions to kind of shout out some first wins in school history, first wins in a long time. So just kind of a cool time for a lot of these teams and programs and school community, alumni who were excited to kind of hear that their school is doing the best it's done in a long time. And we'll get into all of that and going division by division as we typically do. There haven't been a lot of perfect football weekends for Louisiana fans this season with the Saints and some of the struggles of LSU and whatnot, but it seems like every week that I'm kind of recapping on a Sunday or Monday, I look back and say, well, the high school stuff was great. I mean, maybe not for everyone across the state, but from an objective kind of outside standpoint, there was a lot to enjoy. And as you said, I mean, there was a lot of that this past Friday to start off the playoffs. And so the first round is one of our shows that always takes a little while because it's still an awful lot of teams going. So let's dive right into it and try and crank through some of these. But looking at some of the results from Division 4 Select, I'll kind of run through them really quickly and then ask you kind of your biggest takeaways, and we'll kind of go from there. But 16th seeded Opelousas Catholic gets the win against Ascension Christian. 9th seeded St. Edmund gets the 62-18 win against Lincoln Prep. That's 62 points, tied for the most by anybody in the state in any division this past weekend. St. Mary's came down this way and got an upset of St. John, 30-14. Westminster Christian of Lafayette got an upset of Sacred Heart Ville Platte out there in the Lafayette Ville Platte area, 26-21. St. Frederick, big win over Cedar Creek. Kentwood gets a 28-13 win over Vermilion Catholic in that game that we talked about. Was a pretty interesting, intriguing, small school first round game. Southern Lab, 46-6 over Central Catholic, moves on and will face OCS in the next round. And then Delta Charter comes down to Metairie and gets a win over St. Martin's Episcopal, 28-15 to advance and face Riverside, St. Martin's district rival. So it'll be a long trip back-to-back weeks for Delta Charter. But looking at some of those and then we'll get into kind of what's ahead. What stood out to you about that D4 select group for round one?
I think the most surprising result I saw was that 21-12 win, St. Mary's over St. John. We talked last week about, St. John's a special school to my family. It's where my daughter goes to school. And, 7-3 season, first home playoff game since Moby Dick was a minnow. All right. And so you really thought, but hey, St. Mary's, credit to them, not only making the trip down from Natchitoches, but man, I think it shows if you look at both team schedules, St. Mary had better results against good competition than St. John did against good competition. So St. John had a 6-point loss to North Iberville, who's still in the playoffs. But then the only two other playoff teams I believe that they faced were Ascension Catholic and Hamilton Christian, who both put a whooping on the Eagles. And then if you look at St. Mary's schedule, they have a 6-point loss to Logansport. They have a 2-score loss to St. Frederick's, who's still in it. They beat a Manny team, who's another playoff team. They lose 6 points to Red River, who's a playoff team, and they have an opening. They go up in classification in week 1 and lose a heavy-handed game to Bunkie. But that's the benefit of going up in class early in the season. Is not only does that help you with power rankings, but after that you're playing against teams on your level as far as number of players go. So I guess I shouldn't be too surprised when you look at how St. Mary performed this year in some of those tough games. But you feel for the kids at St. John. They've been kind of building to that opportunity to have a home playoff game. Some really good years under Kobe Minton and now Brian Truxclair. But they come up short. But the Eagles will be back. I think they've laid a foundation now to be far more competitive than they've been in years past. And then the other one you mentioned, 20 Westminster Lafayette over 13 Sacred Heart. That's a district rematch, and the Chargers get the best of the Trojans there. And now that their reward for winning a district rematch is another district rematch against the Catholic Appoint Capee Hornets, who are playing really, really good ball right now. Those are your two upsets that were, kind of not a 16-17 or 15-18 type matchup. Those were several seeded differences. But I guess neither one of them should really surprise us when you look at the results that they've had throughout the year.
So Westminster Lafayette is actually in a different district, just to correct that.
Gotcha.
And that's confused me certainly before as well. But that was the first time that those two particular had played, but still the Lafayette area representation is strong in that half of the bracket with the Chargers, who move on to face Catholic Point Capee, who ends up, while they're just a little bit over the river from us in Baton Rouge, they're out there with a lot of those Opelousas schools in district who are all up at the top of this bracket with Westminster Christian of Opelousas Catholic, and St. Edmund up there as a 9 seed. And so there's going to be an awful lot of familiarity that starts hitting really quickly here in the Division IV select bracket. Jumping right into what we're looking at in round 2, as much as we talked about how cool that Kentwood Vermilion Catholic first round matchup was, we now have a 7-10 between OCS and Southern Lab. That is a matchup we've seen in the Dome before. It's a matchup we've seen in semis and quarterfinals a ton. And so it's hard to not have that one immediately jump out, although there are some great matchups all over the place. What are you looking at as we head into the second round and get all of these top seeded teams fresh off of buys?
Well, I think it's really the first game that you mentioned is a hard one not to immediately just, talk about. If you look at the split era, I don't know if I guess that's the best thing to call it, is the split era. Who's dominated Division IV Select? You could make an argument for Southern Lab and Ouachita Christian. All right, two teams that have both won a lot of championships, both played in a lot of really big playoff games. And so that's the kind of matchup that you don't really expect to get this early on. You're looking at Southern Lab, who's a 7-time state champion. They've won 4 in the split era. Obviously, 2 of those, I believe, were vacated in 15 and 16. But you have wins in 2021 and 2023. So 4 on-field state championships just in the split era. And then if you look at Ouachita Christian in the split era, you're looking at a team who has won 3 state championships in the split era. All right, so, we've been in the split since 2013, and that is 7 of the on-field state championships in this division have been won by these 2 schools. And you're getting them in round 2. This isn't even a quarter. All right, and so, 2 teams from opposite sides of the state, both with a lot of history, tremendous graduates that have come out of that school. in multiple sports. You talk about OCS in baseball, Southern Lab in basketball. You can go throughout their entire, athletic rosters, two teams with a ton of history that have seen each other, like you mentioned, a lot and in some big moments. All right. And so that's a treat for us as just nerds of Louisiana high school football is to get a matchup like that so early, and especially with what waits ahead for the winner in the quarterfinals.
The fact that it is a cross state deal is really interesting to me here. This is a Southern Lab team that is a 10 seed, and I think they're certainly I would rank them as a higher likelihood contender than the 10th best in the bracket. They went through some ups and downs, playing the tough non-district schedule they always do, playing some bigger schools and all those things. They dealt with some injuries, without their star quarterback for a few weeks there, and so they bring an awful lot of potential as a lower seeded team. But the challenge of going up there, having to take that long trip, is always interesting to watch how a team of high school guys handles it. It's something certainly Southern Lab has done in the past and gone up north and come away with some big wins. But when you look at how some of these matchups shake up, how much do things like the opportunity to have rested versus, the opportunity to have played and maybe be in rhythm going into a second round game, just the buy versus not buy dynamic, or how much does being able to play at home versus having to take a particularly long trip across state, 3-4 hours, in some cases 5 hours for some schools, how do those things kind of play out from your perspective as a coach once you get to this time of year?
To kind of just take it piece by piece, what some of the things you mentioned, I think the bye week is really beneficial. But there are occasions where, depending on how week 10 went, you don't want the bye week. I think if you're Ouachita Christian coming off of a week 10 loss, you might want to go ahead and turn around and play again and get the mojo back flowing in your favor. All right. So they lose a 34-21 game to a really good Oak Grove team. And you and I both kept up with that game. It wasn't as close as 34-21. Oak Grove kind of dictated that game. And so there are some situations maybe after a loss where you want the week off to kind of reassess, but then there's times where, hey man, we want to get back on the field and we want to kind of right the ship right away. As far as the travel goes, I think it really just comes down to who's done it before. Who's had to make these long road trips, who has that senior class that's maybe had to be some road dogs before in the playoffs versus the teams that have never done it. And so I think when the travel comes into it, it really just depends on, do you have the day planned out right? How much are you going to be sitting around? Are you going to plan it in a way to where, hey, we get off the bus and it's time to warm up right now? Or are we going to sit in somebody's gym for 2.5 hours because we left too early? Have we made trips like this before? That's a lot. Like you see, like last week we talked, I don't think Shreves had to travel a ton in the playoffs with their current group of seniors, but I gave the nod to Hammond because of travel a little bit with them and the 20-13 matchup, and Shreve won by 40. So I think it all just depends on who your kids are. Can they handle the layover of a bye week? Can they handle long travel? And so there's it just really depends school by school, kid by kid, staff by staff, like how much have we had to do this? How much are our kids used to it? Do we have the maturity, to go and maybe sit in somebody's gym for 2 hours and then go play, as opposed to being the home team and not having to worry about that kind of thing. So I think it really is a school by school type basis.
And in Southern Lab's case, one of those trips north that they've had to make and come away with an upset win was a year ago. 13th seeded Kittens go up to Monroe and face a 4th seeded St. Frederick and come back home with a 24-7 win to send them on to the quarters. And so there is a lot of these guys were a part of that team. This senior class, many of them played big roles last year as juniors for sure. And so it's something that, Coach Asbury can look at and say, guys, we've done this before. Let's go up and do it again against a different team up there from Northeast Louisiana. Jumping over to Division IV non-select as we keep moving. Homer, the 16 seed, gets a 21-20 win against 17 seed Franklin. Jonesboro Hodge, the 9 seed, gets a big 44-20 win over North Central. Vinton gets a 28-0 shutout of district rival DeQuincy. That had been a much closer game just a couple weeks ago, and Vinton takes care of business pretty handily there. Logansport with a 44-0 shutout to advance as the 5 seed. Grand Lake 61 points to Montgomery's 18 to move on. West St. Mary at 28-22 win over Basile. Elton 36-14 against LaSalle. That North Iberville team we just talked about, Coach Gast and company have those guys rolling with a 53-6 opening round win in the Division IV non-select bracket. East Feliciana 44-6. Faraday 58-0 over Northeast. That was the biggest shutout and biggest margin that we saw in any game in any division this weekend. And West St. John 50-6 over General Trask, a General Trask team who obviously had to make one of those long trips south to face the Rams. And West St. John was a team, to me, coming into the year, I thought had a chance to take another nice step back forward as a program. They've got a great talented group there, and it was kind of an up and down regular season, but they start the playoffs with a huge win in a 15-18 matchup that is usually a little bit more evenly matched than that. But looking at some of the first round results from Division IV non-select, what caught your eye?
Well, no upsets. When I think we saw it in basically every bracket is a bit of a surprise. The first thing I got circled, we talked about it last week, is Homer Haynesville at the top. I've talked a ton about my mom being a Haynesville alum. That Homer game always means a lot. It may have meant more a year or two ago to the rest of the state whenever, Homer was rolling on their way to a state championship game. But I guarantee you I know what it means to the kids on both sides. So Homer and Haynesville have been playing since 1907. And I think they've played basically every year, other than maybe a couple of years or maybe some World War I or II action going on to maybe disrupt things a little bit. But they played earlier this year. Haynesville wins 54-6. It would be a lot for Homer to overcome that type of deficit and win a playoff matchup. But it's just good for high school football in Louisiana when Homer and Haynesville are playing, especially in late November. I think that Vinton J. Hodge game is going to be a really exciting one. Both teams coming off, 4 touchdown victories in the first round. Vinton and DeQuincy was a rematch. Vinton, just dominates that game. Coach Kevin McGee and the Logansport Tigers, man, the job that he does every single year. And he goes and plays everybody. Like, he plays Loyola and Calvary and like all these like 3 and 4A schools, like non-district, and it pays off so much when you get to November. It's amazing what he's able to do every single year at Logansport. They're going to play a Welsh team coming off a pretty competitive game in round 1, but one that they still handled by 2 scores. The South Plaquemine team that we saw win a state championship last year, it's probably been a little while since West St. Mary's had a home playoff win. And so now they get rewarded with a travel to South Plaque, which is a long trip for basically anybody in the state. Like, even if you're a South Louisiana team, going to Burris, Louisiana is a ways. And like you said, Coach Joshua Gast, North Iberville rolls through Arcadia. Now they're going to host another playoff game, which is huge for that program, before they potentially have to go on that long trek down to Burris. Actually passed by Delcom's buses Friday night as I was heading out to Westville. They were heading into Eastville. The East Feliciana Tigers and Faraday, probably the most exciting matchup in this second round in Division IV non-select. East Feliciana as a program just has been so steady the last couple of years. We talked about that last week. Being in a really, really tough district, with Dunham and Episcopal, traditionally 2 teams that are really hard to beat. And East Feliciana, earns a 7 seed, gets a big home playoff win. Now they get to be at home again against a very, very athletic Faraday team. And then the Mangum Dragons, seeing what they come out with. after earning the 2 seed, after earning a bye in round 1. Another team from North Louisiana that just, has been so consistent lately, plays in a super tough district, like some of these teams we've talked about. They had the one loss in district to Ouachita Christian. They actually beat Oak Grove by 2 scores. And that Faraday team that we talked about got a big win over them the week before they played Oak Grove. Season opening loss to Gina, who is the 1 seed in Division III non-select. And so now, after a much-deserved bye week, we're going to see what the Mangum Dragons have. West St. John making a long trip up to Mangum for that second-round matchup.
And that matchup is one of a couple of rematches in this bracket from a year ago. Mangum got a 44-6 second-round win against West St. John last year. Also, Jeanerette with a 46-24 win against Grand Lake a year ago, when those two teams were actually the same seeds, 4 and 13. And then, as you mentioned, we have a Haynesville Homer rematch from earlier on in this regular season, and basically every regular season plus some playoffs through the years. And I was checking, to your point, this is the only bracket that did not have any first round upsets. A couple may have only had one, but this is the only full chalk bracket, and I'm looking forward to seeing if that holds here. I do love the top seeds in this bracket. I think that, the higher seeded teams in this bracket, as much as in any other, were kind of the clear top, most dominant, most consistent teams throughout the regular season. But then that 7-10 matchup, the Eastville Faraday matchup, is definitely one of the most intriguing to me anywhere in the state. They're not the top 4 seeds or whatever here, but those are 2 programs with a lot of great tradition, as you mentioned, a ton of talent on those teams, and an opportunity here to advance and get on to the quarterfinals, be playing Thanksgiving weekend. And then, if you can get to Thanksgiving weekend and be healthy and have a little momentum, anything can happen.
What's interesting about this is, as much as we like the top seeds, is just the big difference in the dynamic of who's done it before and who hasn't done it before in these top seeds. Mangum hasn't won a state title since 1956. Jeanerette has never won a state championship. South Platte has won 3, all since 2007. And then Haynesville has won 17. Haynesville is the second most winning state championship program in our state, obviously outside of John Curtis. But the thing with Haynesville is they haven't won one since 2014.
Yeah.
According to 14-0 Productions, who is, golly, I don't know where we'd be without this website. But it's been a while for the Golden Tornado. They've been a top seed a lot since 2014 and just fallen short. Even making it to the state championship game and falling short. The history matters, but it also doesn't matter. It just depends on how you look at it. I don't think anybody's going to be scared of Haynesville. All right. But I also think that Haynesville knows that they have a job to finish that many of their predecessors haven't finished in the past decade. The fact that we're saying that it's been a decade since Haynesville's won a state championship is just, it feels weird to say out loud. But they seemed poised to do it again, but it's not going to be easy. I mean, some of these teams, Logansport, Jeanerette, South Platte, Eastville, Mangum, North Iberville, even the Vinton Jonesboro matchup that they'll have to go through in the second round or in the next round. It's not going to be easy on them. They're going to be challenged as they've been in previous years. They played Jonesboro Hodge actually earlier this year and beat them 43-0. Will that affect Jonesboro Hodge this week against a good Vinton team on the road? Will they be maybe looking ahead to a potential rematch with the Golden Tornado, or will they be able to keep their focus on the Lions? So that's going to be a big task for the coaching staff at Jonesboro Hodge to keep their kids really focused on what's important right now.
No doubt. What are the challenges like of keeping the kids locked in once you get to this time of year? Is most of it just that looking ahead to? It seems like once you get to playoff time and realize this thing's over if you don't take care of business this Friday night, that getting that message across should be a little bit easier. But I guess at the same time, you're still dealing with 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. And so who knows what's going to happen on a given Friday night.
I joke with friends at work all the time that all of us are idiots. And when they ask me, like, what do you mean? I'm like, we based our entire our entire career is based on the decision making of 15 to 17-year-olds. And so I think it kind of goes back to the question you asked a minute ago. Like, it really depends on who your kids are. How much have they done this before? It is a challenge on coaches to keep the main thing, week to week, especially when you get to the playoffs. And shoot, even in the regular season, every kid looks ahead and circles certain dates in their mind on the regular season schedule. And so every single kid looks at these brackets and they're thinking, okay, if we win and then we win and then we'd play these guys. And like, it's almost impossible to eliminate looking ahead entirely. The best you can hope to do is just, contain it, and to trust your kids, especially the programs that have been there a lot, to really focus on what's in front of you. Because, I mean, you and I have seen throughout the years in the playoffs, I mean, if you don't keep what's important now right in front of you, things can go really poorly. I mean, how many upsets have we seen throughout the playoffs? Not even, early round matchups, but, maybe a 4 seed losing to a 13 because they were worried about what was coming next, about maybe that home quarterfinal. It happens every single year. You could go back on the brackets on LHSAA's website, and you can see every year where teams that had no business losing a playoff game fall short of their ultimate goal because they're worried about what's going to come next. And so it's hard because, like you said, it's 15, 18-year-old kids, but it's just so vital to keep what's important. And it is a challenge. But like I said, the really good programs obviously do a really, really good job of it.
Looking at Division III select now as we keep moving up that bracket division ladder in enrollment size. Again, starting out, just kind of looking at some of the scores. Parkview Baptist with a 42-28 win over Darbone Woods Charter in a 16-17 matchup. Catholic New Iberia 52-0 over Glen Oaks, the reigning champions in this bracket, with one of the biggest shutout victories around the state in any division this past weekend. 12th seeded Northlake Christian 59-20 over St. Louis Catholic. 13th seeded Holy Savior Menard 47-0 over Thomas Jefferson. Slaughter Community Charter 14-19 over Pope John Paul II. 14-19 seeds, 21-17 final score. Country Day 56-15 over Beekman Charter. A meet with a 59-20 win over Walter Cohen. And the upset in this bracket, I mentioned some of them only had one, was an 18-15 De La Salle with a 45-14 win against Episcopal. Two teams that obviously have their respective levels of postseason success, including De La Salle making some dome and in the COVID year Natchitoches runs. Episcopal is a team that obviously has a history of winning a playoff game, a couple playoff games in a lot of brackets and playing around Thanksgiving. And so 45-14 win on the road for De La Salle, a pretty notable one there heading into what will be a fun, physical second round matchup at Notre Dame, the 2 seed. As we look through that D3 select bracket, what stands out from the first Friday?
I got to give a tip of the cap to just a couple of guys that I've worked with. Obviously, Devin Ducote at Parkview getting his first playoff win in his first season. We'll talk about later on another guy that I have worked with getting his first playoff win as a coach. So a couple of those. So obviously Devin Ducote had some playoff success at Westphal. All right, but obviously it's his first season as the head coach of Parkview, his alma mater. And I can't imagine just the pride he felt of leading his alma mater to a playoff victory. And then if you look down at the bottom of the bracket, like you mentioned, Slaughter Charter, not a super long history yet in the LHSAA, and not a lot of playoff wins. They got a couple in there. It's not their first or anything, but not a ton yet, on their belt. And so they get a home victory over Pope John Paul II in a really competitive game. Country Day really just blowing the doors off Beekman Charter, really surprises me a little bit. And that sets up a really, really fun matchup with Calvary Baptist, on Linwood Avenue next Friday night. But honestly, I have a hard time even saying that's the funnest one in the second round because, man, Bunkie and Catholic New Iberia, two teams that obviously run the ball extremely well. And then at the bottom of the bracket, Lafayette Renaissance, who's kind of bursting on the scene here, earns a bye as the 7 seed. I think it's just their second season.
Yeah, it's just their second full season.
Yeah. Obviously, they had a couple of losses to some really talented district teams. Obviously, LCA there, and the history between those two schools that's already there, even after just a few years. And them and A-Meet, A-Meet, you talk about a team who has been there, done that a lot. A-Meet, if you go back, a 6-time state champion, most recently in 2021. Not many Louisiana schools can, tout that they have a Heisman winner on their list. And he's one of the few, all right, that's come out of Louisiana high school football. All right. If I'm not wrong, there's only been 2. I might be wrong. Devontae Smith from A-Meet and John David Crow from Spring Hill. I think those are the only 2 Louisiana high school Heisman Trophy winners. But A-Meet, another team with a ton of history. Like I said, 2 state titles here in the split era. A couple others in the late 90s, one in 2004, one back in 1963. But that's a really fun matchup, and I think those are probably the 3 that stick out in this bracket the most. Lafayette Renaissance and A-Meet hosting A-Meet, Calvary Baptist hosting Country Day, and Bunkie hosting Catholic New Iberia, who Catholic New Iberia hasn't had to travel a ton late in the last couple of years in the playoffs. And so they're in a position now to where they're going to have to travel probably a couple of times if they want to get back to the Superdome. But that's going to be a really good matchup. North Lake Christian gets a win over St. Louis, but, congrats. Now you get Elijah Haven and the Dunham Tigers. Same thing with Menard. Hey, you get a big win over Thomas Jefferson, playoff win. And now you get Newman, who's consistently one of the best programs in this division every single year. And so there's a lot of really tough matchups for some of these seeds in the teens that have made their way into the second round. But then those 3 matchups are probably the most exciting. And you could probably put those 3 matchups against most other brackets, and they'll still probably carry a lot of weight as being pretty exciting games.
Yeah, we text obviously every week about just some of the games we're most looking forward to the next week, all season long. You, for Louisiana Football Report, do your kind of 5 games you're most looking forward to watching. And I, on Louisiana versus Loyola this year, started spotlighting and kind of diving into 10 matchups around the state. And we were texting this weekend. I think a lot of the most intriguing matchups are the smaller school brackets, the D3s and D4s. Certainly not across the board. There are some great ones we're going to get to in some of these higher classifications, but there are a number of fantastic D3 and D4 matchups, including the ones that you mentioned here in this bracket. I love, as you mentioned, the 8-9 with Bunkie and Catholic New Iberia, Zion Lee and Owen Morris, 2 guys that have had phenomenal senior seasons running the ball, as kind of the faces at least of those run games, but both will have plenty of folks involved and getting touches there. Lafayette Renaissance and A-Meet was another one that, along with that Catholic and Bunkie, before the playoffs started, I kind of circled the potential of that one as a second round matchup and possibly a place where I would go cover a game on a Friday night, on this Friday night. And so I still have yet to finalize my pick, but those 2 have been on the short list. And when you have an outcome like Country Day did, where you put up 56 in your opening round playoff game, I think that starts to catch some folks' attention maybe a little bit more than folks were expecting going into the second round against Calvary Baptist. I think a lot of folks probably just kind of looked and said, okay, well, Calvary Baptist, we recognize those guys making deep runs every year. They're probably going to go on to the next round. But I think Country Day in some big games this season has shown that they can put up some points. They have certainly a ton of talent. We talked about some of that last week with the bracket reactions, but yeah, up and down this bracket, certainly some good ones. But heading on to D3 non-select, the last of the smaller school brackets, the four D3 and D4s. St. Helena went to Avoyelles and got a huge 17-16 win, 58-26. Marksville with a 48-14 win over Patterson to advance. Mansfield gets a 42-12 win over Winfield, and so that sets up a Marksville-Mansfield rematch from the playoffs a year ago. Erath stays undefeated with a 56-0 rout of Bogalusa. Union Parish 41-18 over Rayville. Kaplan, the 20 seed, gets an upset of 13th seeded Pine, 33-18. Manny takes care of business against Red River 35-27 in a rematch of a game that Red River had won pretty handily during the regular season. Richwood 40-20 over Caldwell Parish. Oak Grove continues to build on that late season momentum for the Tigers, 47-0 win over Port Allen. Laurelville 28-6 over Ville Platte to advance to face Church Point, who beat North Webster 42-7. And Donaldsonville, Coach Lee and company down there with an 18-0 shutout over Westlake in the 15 versus 18 game. That was one that I was really interested to watch. The Donaldsonville defense versus that Westlake offense and Brody Anderson and company. And credit to the Tigers, man, taking care of business at home with a shutout win in the playoffs to advance on to the second round. Your kind of immediate thoughts as we look at Division III non-select?
Yeah, so that Donaldsonville Westlake game was one of my 5 games to watch last week. Coach Darnell Lee obviously doing a really good job in Donaldsonville after his years at East Ascension. A shutout win and a 15-18 matchup is pretty impressive, especially when you expect that to be one of your more competitive games in the first round with all the byes that everybody gets nowadays. But incredible job. That Westlake offense, as you mentioned, has some really good players on it. And so to pitch a shutout there is pretty impressive. And then, hey, like we talk about the rewards of playoff wins, now you get to go to Sterlington. So congratulations to Donaldsonville. Really, really impressive by the Manny Tigers, to lose 34-6 to Red River just a few weeks ago. And then come back and play them again in the playoffs. And, and this should be a little motivation to some of those teams we've talked about. Like, hey, you have a rematch in the playoffs. Hey, well, if Manny can do it, you can too. All right. Now, I believe this is Manny's first playoff win post Jess Curtis. If I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
I don't think they've won one since Coach Curtis made his way to Natchitoches Central and now Southside. So really big win for them, district rematch. But again, congratulations. Now you get to go to Vacherie, Louisiana and play St. James. Richwood and Oak Grove, good little North Louisiana matchup, which you don't always get those deeper into the playoffs. Both teams coming off pretty convincing wins. Richwood, 3 scores over Caldwell. Oak Grove does what Oak Grove does when the calendar turns to November and has a dominant first-round playoff win over Port Allen. Now we're going to see some of those teams that were on bye weeks, kind of get themselves set for some of these matchups. Kinder gets the bye as the 4 seed, and now they're going to host a number 20 Kaplan team who's coming off a pretty convincing upset win over a 13-seeded Pine, who I kept up with a lot this year. Pine's a good football team, and Kaplan went on the road and handled up business there pretty convincingly, 33-18 over the Pine Raiders. And so I think in this matchup you have kind of like that Division IV non-select that we looked at, where it's like, yes, you just want to talk about the top 4 seeds because it's easy to just focus on those guys, especially when it's a team like Sterlington who's won 3 state championships in the split era. 16, 2021, defending champions 2024. Coach Lee Dottie just keeps on winning there. That's all he does. And now they have a beautiful new facility, which rivals some of the colleges I played against in Division III ball back in the day. And so really, really impressive. Gina's at the top of the bracket. No state championships yet for Gina. All right, looking to obviously change that this year. But, St. James, obviously a team with a ton of history. Recent history has had some recent heartbreak in the Superdome at the hands of a Trey Holly-led Union Parish team back in 2023. Their last state championship coming in 2019. And so similar to that Division IV bracket or Division IV non-select bracket, you see a lot of these teams with just tremendous history. But obviously, those Gina and Sterlington seem like they're almost on a crash course for each other. But obviously, you have to go through a lot of really good ball teams in this bracket to get there. Probably most excited myself for that Mansfield-Marksville matchup. Mansfield, you talk about another team with just some community investment. They have a covered turf practice facility. I don't know if you've seen that yet, that they're building. It's basically what Nicholls State has. Like they're getting, I don't know if it's done yet, but they are building that at Mansfield High School. So incredible investment by that community. Obviously they're trying to up their game as far as, the who's who in DeSoto Parish. Obviously they have a lot of competition with Logan Sport and North DeSoto being parish neighbors. And they're going to host a Marksville team coming off a really big win. It seems like Marksville just is a consistent playoff representative in the top half of the bracket. And so that's going to be a really, really good game. You looking to see if Mansfield can keep things rolling after they had a couple of tough years. Seems like they're getting things going in the right direction, though.
And just, I guess, a point of correction for each of us. I said that Marksville-Mansfield matchup is a rematch of a playoff game a year ago. It was 2023. Those two teams met in the first round, and it was a Mansfield 31-28 win in obviously a really close one in a 15-18 matchup. And Mansfield that year got to advance on to face that Sterlington team. So similar dynamic to what you mentioned this year with Donaldsonville. And Manny won a couple of playoff games a year or two, in 2023 under Coach Dylan Barrett, but this was new coach Tyler Hassel's first year and first opportunity to win a playoff game. And so after a really rough 2024, the Tigers, with some positive things happening in November here, up there in Manny and in this Division III non-select bracket, I'm certainly someone that looks at, similar to what you mentioned, Gina, Sterlington, and St. James is kind of the top tier elites of this bracket, the likeliest title contenders that feel like they're on a collision course. But then you look at 4th seeded and 5th seeded Kinder and Erath are undefeated, and some of those other notable teams there. Oak Grove is a 6th seed that obviously has so much recent playoff success and is capable of making a run. And they showed in week 10, that game we talked about some during the D4 select bracket, they show that they can match up with any small school team in the state with what they did to jump out on OCS the way they did. And like Lauraville, like Church Point, some of these other teams, Union Parish, Spat and company are going to have those guys fired up on a Friday night. Even if it hasn't been their best regular season, they're going to be ready to battle with anyone that's on the opposite side of the field from them. And so some really fun matchups in D3 non-select. And I also realized during the course of us talking about this one that I'd not realized how many comments were coming in. And so just kind of recognizing some of those, particularly for the divisions we've already been through. We have someone shouting out Riverside as a D1 or D4 select favorite. We've got Josh Clement mentioning his son Peyton, quarterback for that Covenant Christian team, the 8th seed in that D4 select bracket. That's going to be a really fun matchup with St. Edmunds, the 8-9 matchup in that D4 select. And really good point here, and something we talked about some during the bracket release, but 2-2A can possibly produce 3 state champions when you look at Oak Grove in D3 non-select, Ferrety Mangum in that D4 non-select, and an OCS in D4 select. We've seen some instances, obviously, where some teams make some deep runs and bring multiple state championships back to the same district, and District 2-2A would be definitely a candidate to watch to possibly pull off a feat of that nature this year. I mean, some of the teams that were among the top 2A teams all year long this regular season. I don't know if you have any other thoughts before we jump up to D2 select.
No, and like you said, I just want to again mention, like you said, Kinder. Not to not give any love to Kinder. Kinder's won two state titles in the split era, 13 and 15. A team that obviously, like you said, undefeated, a team that can make a deep run. A really good Erath Bobcats team. Obviously facing Union Parish is going to be a struggle because I have played against Spat with me as a player, him as a coach, me as a coach, him as a coach. Like it's never easy. We had some wars back in the day with Calvary and Union Parish. I'm glad that those two are still playing. Not a cut and dry bracket, but like it's hard to not highlight those top three seeds.
Going up to Division II Select, we had a Northside 27-20 win over LB Landry, the 17 seed over the 16 seed. I need to look up, but Coach Jacardi Carter and company getting the Vikings their first playoff win in like a decade and a half. I think it was like 15 years. I'll look up the exact one, the exact number in a second. St. Michael with a big 35-12 win against Laranger to advance. I mean, big wins. John F. Kennedy, 55-0 over Frederick Douglass. And I mean, that's a Douglass team that I had a chance to see in the spring. They had some talent. They were a well-coached group when I had a chance to see them. And so not necessarily surprised that a JFK team that's had some recent success, both regular season and postseason, for them to get the win. But that's a pretty big statement win type game to open up the playoff, 55-0. Booker T. Washington of Shreveport gets a win over Estruma in a rematch of last year's first round game. BTW gets their revenge and advances and will now head on to face U High in the second round. Leesville with a big 52-7 win over Kenner Discovery. George Washington Carver with a win over Livingston Collegiate 24-17 in a rematch of a regular season game. Haynes Academy, I mentioned at the beginning, first program playoff win. So shout out to Coach PJ Strunk and those guys. Just a great week for the Yellow Jackets. They win 41-0. And so not only a great week to get a win, but a really emphatic first playoff win, 41-0 over Abramson. And speaking of notable history there, the 18th seeded Bel Air Bengals with the upset of the 15th seeded Patrick Taylor, 42-31. That's one that you and I were texting about Friday night as I was still sitting in the Acadiana parking lot trying to get through all that traffic. It was the first win for Bel Air since 2003, and they had only been to the playoffs 3 times since then. So this was their 4th playoff trip in 2 decades, and they get their first playoff win in over 2 decades. So shout out to Coach Mativa and company over there, right here in town in Baton Rouge.
Man, I've coached against Bel Air in 2 different instances of being in the same district as those guys. They've had some struggles, man. They've had some really tough years. It's really what it's all about. Getting a group of kids to just keep believing in each other, and to do something that the last time it happened, no one on your roster was born. Yeah. That's pretty freaking cool. That's history. I guarantee those guys are going to walk into school on Monday feeling real good, strutting down the hallways at Bel Air High School. Shout out to them. Shout out to Coach Strunk, like you mentioned, Haynes Academy, first playoff win in school history after they, were a high seed last year also and get beat in the first round by an Estruma team that was really, really talented. So they had to wait a little bit for it. Really impressive to go get it the way they got it. 41-0 over Abramson. And congrats, now you get the defending state champion in your bracket. But at least it's a local game. Yeah, that's a really cool local game there. We don't get a ton of those. As you go deep into the playoffs, a lot of those like rematches and stuff I feel like happen a lot early. But now, Shaw and Haynes Academy, not a very long drive there for the Yellow Jackets. Now you talk about a long drive, the Booker T. Washington Lions, first playoff win they've had in a really long time. Now they get to go to Baton Rouge to face a University Lab team who I would identify, to me, if I was identifying what U High feels, I feel like that's just a pissed off group of kids. Obviously, last year, arguably the best team in their division, and they missed the playoffs. All right, due to obviously stuff that had nothing to do with the kids. And now they're in a situation where they're the 4 seed. Obviously, felt like they should have been higher with the non-district schedule that they play. But obviously, hey, it's not personal; it's math. The LHSAA takes the feelings out of it with these power rankings. All right, but a team that's battle tested and ready to roll. And I'm not just saying this because my nephew starts at nose guard. I would rather talk bad about his team if I could help it, but it's hard to. They play Rummel, they play Catholic High. Teams they play St. Paul's. I mean, so this is a battle tested group of Cubs who got a freaking gritty win over Madison Prep to win their district championship in Week 10. Maybe on a collision course again to face the Chargers once again, but it'll once again be at the Cub Complex if they do play. All right. And then shout out to St. Michael, Coach Zach Leger, who's an alum of St. Michael, friend of mine that I've worked with. First playoff win in school history came just a few years ago against Livingston Collegiate, and now they have their first home playoff victory in school history because they are playing on campus for the first time in their school's history. They opened a beautiful stadium out there off of Monitor Avenue this year, and I know that means a lot to them. I remember being an assistant coach at St. Michael in 2016, and my first day there, I looked at the practice field and said, why don't we just play here? And Zach Leger told me, that'll never happen, dude. And I was right in the long run as I normally am. If I'm right, it's usually never right away. It's usually in the long run. So that's awesome for them. And now they get to travel down to Thibodaux to face an Edie White team where Kyle Lassane has done just an incredible job, especially in his second stint as the head coach of the Cardinals. They've had trips to the state championship under his care. A freaking war against University Lab a few years ago at Cajun Field in the state championship. Obviously this is a bracket where you look at a team like St. Charles at the top, but it doesn't seem as cut and dry as some of these other brackets with the top seeds. I mean, would it shock you at all if 7-seeded Shaw won the state championship? No. I mean, would it shock you if 3 Lake Charles Prep made a run, or 4 U High, or 5 Madison Prep? Or E.D. White is the 8th seed. Like, this is a bracket that I feel like is a little bit more open than most people probably think. And if you look at some of those top 8 seeds, that's just some dang good football programs that have had a lot of success in history. Trips to the state championship victories. And this is going to be a much more, I think, competitive bracket than people think.
There's going to be some interesting matchups certainly this week. And then this is one that by the time you get to the quarters, it's like every matchup would be one that I would love to be at on Thanksgiving weekend. One of those weeks where I would love to clone myself and be on every sideline around the state. This feels like as big of the kind of feel good stories of round one. It feels like some of the most of those in any bracket. And we listed through a bunch of those. I did check. It has been 15 years, like I thought, for Northside between playoff wins. And so great accomplishment for Jacardi Carter and company. You mentioned Zach Leger and the Warriors getting another playoff win. And we were talking 2 years ago about waiting for that opportunity to get the first one. It's crazy how much time flies, because that just like that Mansfield and Marksville game to me felt like it was just a year ago, but it's been 2 years. And I'm sure when you mentioned being an assistant at St. Michael, it doesn't feel like a decade ago already. I still remember going to visit Coach Held and company over there years back when I was first getting back to Baton Rouge and enjoying that practice field. That you mentioned, Booker T. Washington Shreveport, first playoff win since 2008. I looked it up, so shout out to Coach Coop and company up there getting that done, and now get a chance to come down our way for a second round game. And that list just goes on with PJ Sprunk at Haynes Academy, his first year over there, getting the Yellow Jackets on to the second round, and Coach Mativa at Bel Air. But now it just ratchets up that much more in difficulty when you deal with the as Wayne Stein likes to say, SCC versus all y'all. St. Charles Catholic Comets feel like they're the team to beat any given Friday night, and you get into some of the U Highs and Madison Preps rested and fresh off buys. I mean, two teams that I've voted as the number one team in Class 3A all season long. While their record maybe didn't match, an undefeated Jules Sumner. You talked about it with U High, just battle tested as could be with a lot of 5A competition before both of those teams got into their district runs. But yeah, good slate. I'm just going to say that every bracket, I guess, just a good slate of second round games, and just continues to get more and more fun each and every week. If you have anything else to add to Division II select, throw it out there. But if not, we can move on to D2 non-select.
Yeah, like you touched on, arguably the best potential slate of quarterfinal games in the entire state.
D2 non-select. DeRidder with a 35-16 win over Eunice in the 16-17 game. Jennings with a big 56-18 win over St. Martinville. Franklinton, the 8 seed, with a 51-14 win over Rain to advance to face Jennings. Plaquemine 55-0 over Livonia advances to face Wassman, who as a 21 seed went out to Minden and got a 35-14 upset. First playoff win for first-year coach John Diarse, the former Neville star, went on to play at LSU and TCU. Cecilia, the reigning champs, a 13 seed, but get a 56-7 win over Carroll and advance to face Lakeshore. Opelousas goes on the road to Pearl River, gets a 13-0 shutout against Pearl River to advance to face Belle Chase. West Feliciana game we kind of alluded to earlier. Coach Terry Miner and the Saints getting a big 49-6 win against Bossier. Advanced to set up a district rematch against Bruley, who got a 42-6 win over Albany. Franklin Parish 62-12 over Abbeville. That's the other instance, as I mentioned. St. Ed's had tied for the most points scored by any team in the first round. Franklin Parish is the other team with 62 points to advance to face Lutcher, who won 49-7 against Iota. Northwest with a 45-0 shutout of South Terrebonne advances, and we'll see second-seeded Iowa in this Friday's action. So now we get North DeSoto and Iowa and Belle Chase and Lakeshore into the mix. But starting out looking at some of the takeaways from Friday night, what catches your eye from D2 non-select?
So two of the things I want to highlight, two games, really 1 point. We've talked a lot just on this episode about you've asked me about like the travel and the bye weeks and what does it do and how do you navigate it and things like that. There is something so much to be said for we've done this before. Like, hey, we've been in this situation. And I think that speaks to two results that really stuck out. We saw a couple of 2013 upsets, not in this bracket. You see Cecilia 56-7 over Carroll. Cecilia's got a new coach after all their success. All right. And then you look at another team who has a new coach, Opelousas, Harry Coleman, former LSU Tiger. And they go get a shutout win on the road at Pearl River, a Pearl River team that had a pretty solid season. And so just to highlight those two teams and just what they've just continuing their success, even in a situation like they were last year where they're not a super high seed. We saw both of these teams last year make super deep playoff runs in the teens. Cecilia won the whole thing was it the 18?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which obviously, they were in a situation where Diesel had been banged up during the course of the season, so they lost a couple that they probably wouldn't have without him. And I know last year, Dwayne Jenkins as the I think 2 seed, Lutcher and a lot of other teams that were on that half of the bracket were like, "You kidding me? Like we got to deal with Cecilia as an 18 on our side of this thing."
So obviously, those are two results that I think speak to what I've been talking about of just like, hey, we've been here before. Oh, we have to go on the road. Who cares? Like those types of things. So those are two results that really stick out. Shout out to Coach Donald Williams at Plaquemine for getting just another playoff win. They've become such a consistent just menace in this Division II non-select bracket. Plaquemine has. The big upset obviously comes from Wassman over Minden. A pretty lopsided win. You weren't really sure what was going to happen with Wassman, with their coach, going to the college ranks and being in a situation under new leadership there. But they go and get a playoff win on the road Terry Minor, like I mentioned, obviously a guy that I consider family, um, and gets his first playoff win, period, as a head coach. And I actually went to that one, and just incredible to see that. The West Feliciana community just loves football so much, and they have for a really long time. If you go back to Rob Odom, Hudson Fuller, Devin Ducote, Terry Minor, whoever's at the helm, it doesn't really matter. That parish loves some football. Unique situation, obviously. One high school in the whole parish, which is awesome to me. I love a good water tower type town. Um, and so sets up a really cool matchup with Bruley in the second round at Bruley. Bruley got the best of them, 21-13 in a district matchup. Bruley's lone loss on the season came to that Plaquemine team, who's the 5 seed. But in this bracket, it is so hard to not just put my entire laser focus on Letcher Franklin Parish.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what a game. Like, you talk about, Franklin Parish, I mean, athletically, arguably one of the most talented teams in the entire state. And then you look at a Letcher team who's won 9 state championships, 3 of which just in the split era, as I continue to reference it. And so, Dwayne Jenkins, like you said, just every freaking year. And I know people are probably tired of hearing about Letcher down there doing it every single year. But they just do. They're just so consistent, so good year in, year out. And now they have to make a trip that for them is a pretty stinking long one up to Franklin Parish. And that's probably one of the longer trips. I know we did that a lot last year. We looked at some of these trips that teams have to take, and you'll see a lot more longer ones, especially as you go deep in the playoffs. But Letcher going to Franklin Parish is probably one of the longer trips that you'll see in the playoffs this week. But that game has some firework potential. And I'm really looking forward to that one, especially.
It's a long enough trip that while it is one of my favorite games in the state, I'm not going up there because after how late I got back, even just from Acadiana last week, and then the turnaround to this week was, a little bit different because we had breakfast ball in Tiger Stadium, and so it was a morning kickoff, and that was a little bit of a miserable turnaround, but I wouldn't be looking forward to potentially driving back from Winsboro overnight Friday night to then have a Saturday of college football coverage on deck on Saturday. But it is certainly one of the top matchups in the state in any division. There are some great ones here. I'm glad you mentioned, Coach Champagne with Cecilia, Coach Coleman with Opelousas getting their first wins with these schools, certainly. Terry Minor, we mentioned John Diars, we mentioned. Hopefully we're not forgetting anybody, but really cool to see with some changes in leadership and some guys getting into coaching in some cases. In some cases, really young coaches that, haven't been around that long. I can remember guys being players, which makes me feel that much older when we're talking about them now getting their first wins as high school head coaches. Congrats to those guys, and really, really looking forward to some of these second round games, and then obviously moving on in that bracket. Up to Division I now. Where we'll probably get a chance to spend a little bit more time with some of these, and we'll look at Division I select. I know we've had folks in the chat who were commenting about Division I games from the time we were talking Division IV, and so hopefully a lot of those folks have stayed with us, and we'll get a chance to hear us talk more about some of these teams. In Division I select, 17th seeded Jesuit with a 46-7 win over 16th seeded McDonough 35. All of that, home field advantage and dealing with the long trips and whatnot you look forward to as a higher seed, and having to have someone come to you doesn't really work out when you're New Orleans and you're all sharing parks and whatnot. And so Jesuit, not much of a trip there to get the 46-7 win over McDonough 35. St. Paul's gets a 56-7 win over Pineville. Brother Martin survives Liberty in a close one to advance and set up a game with Alexandria that I think this is the third time these teams will have met in the playoffs in the last 3 or 4 years. So there's becoming a little bit of a D1 select postseason tradition of Alexandria and Brother Martin facing, but Liberty with Coach Zachary nearly messed that up in Tad Gormley Stadium this past week. We talked a little bit about it earlier, that Captain Shreve as a 20 seed, 61-21 upset over 13 seeded Hammond. Big day for the Gators. It sounds like star running back Jamarce Plater was even banged up for a stretch of that game, and the Gators just kind of kept rolling. And so huge win for Coach Wilburn and company to advance to face now you guys this week, Catholic Baton Rouge. And so that's going to be a tough one for the Gators to have to come back south and deal with the Bears. Acadiana versus Karen Crow. That's the one that I was at, as I mentioned before, a 29-21 win for Acadiana. Back-to-back weeks, they get a chance to take care of home wins against their rival Bears. That was a fun one to be at, certainly. Two teams that have met in 3 of the past 4 postseasons now, and since a 2022 postseason win for Karen Crow, Acadiana's won the last 5 meetings head-to-head between those District 3 5A rivals. Archbishop Rummel with a 24-0 shutout of Holy Cross in a Catholic League rematch advances. St. Thomas More 41-7 over crosstown rival Lafayette, who was the 23 seed. And so STM will advance to face John Curtis, the 7 seed. And then where I was at on Thursday, another one of these cool kind of coaching stories. Bonneville, the 18 seed, gets the win over 15 seeded Riverdale. It was another of those Week 10 rematches. Bonneville 28-14 over the Riverdale Rebels. The first career coaching win for Andre Anthony, the young man who was a star at Miller McCoy and Edna Carr and then LSU, just getting into coaching and gets a chance to lead the Bruins to their first playoff win since 1997. Had just led them to their first district championship a week earlier since 1998. And so it was cool to have a chance to be there for that night. It was going to be cool either way because Riverdale's still looking for its first win in program history in the playoffs. And so I was headed to a story one way or the other, but Bonneville takes care of business. Both defenses were great, and Bonneville with Carl Perkins, Raheem Williams able to find some things offensively there to beat the Rebels. This is where you live now, D1 Select. So as you watched some of these outcomes roll in, what were your biggest takeaways on Friday night?
The first one that really sticks out to me is one you spent a few minutes on. Just I know it was a loss for them, but man, just the job that Jimmy Zachary and them did at Liberty this year. I texted Coach. I don't know Coach Zachary that well. But I made sure I texted him today and just congratulated him on just a great first season. Obviously they have a to me a program defining win over Zachary in district play. The kind of win that makes everybody in the state kind of go like and just sit up. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then they go on the road to face a Catholic League school. And they fall by 1 point. Obviously, a game that could have easily gone either way. And so the Coach Jimmy Zachary is laying an incredible foundation, I think, at Liberty to just continue to get better and better. They have a quarterback running back tandem there that run the ball as good as anybody, really, as far as quarterback running back tandems go in the state. They ran for about 400 yards, I think, against Zachary combined. And so the needle's definitely, I think, pointing up over there off of Lee Drive in Baton Rouge. But some of these matchups, man, like, Captain Shreve, just takes the long trip down there and just takes care of business against the Hammond Tornadoes. Man, you mentioned the running back there at Shreve, but, man, like the guy that sticks out to me is Caleb Law, wide receiver for the Gators. Obviously has some pretty good genes in his family. But I mean, to quote the longest yard, he makes fast people look not fast. Caleb Law has track speed, and he can get away from a secondary really, really quick. He had a tremendous game against Hammond also, from what I was able to see. Acadiana and Karen Crow, kind of if you'd call it the marquee matchup in this bracket in the first round, kind of lived up to the hype. I don't know what was I think your stay in the parking lot may have been longer than the game itself. But
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I felt like we were getting out of there at pretty good time. There were definitely many games still happening, but then there was like a game or two that somehow felt like they finished while we were like just finishing the third quarter. And so I don't know how the heck teams finished that fast when, we're still working through Karen Crone Acadiana at that rate. But yeah, it was a long night for me for sure, because it was packed out there.
And this is an interesting one here. Tioga is the 6th seed, and they get a bye in the first round. We saw what happened to the other Division I 4A team, and that was the Northwood Falcons that we'll talk about against the Bar Buccaneers. Is there going to be a little bit of that for Tioga, where yes, they're at home, yes, they're coming off a bye, they're rested, but they did play a 4A schedule. All right, obviously they're a very, very good team. But now your first playoff game, you're in Division I. Every school you're going to play from here on out is bigger than you. And you're playing the Archbishop Rummel Raiders, a team with obviously almost as much history as anybody, a team that has been a thorn in the side of many teams down in that New Orleans area and in the playoffs throughout the last couple of years. I know at Catholic, we've played them both years that I've been there in the playoffs. It is a team with a ton of history. 2 state titles in the split era, 3 overall, 2012, 2013, 2019. Obviously a lineage of guys like Jamar Chase that have come through Archbishop Rummel. And so that's going to be an extremely tough challenge for Tioga. Luckily for them, obviously it's at home. But you're going to see maybe the difference in just who they've played, I think, maybe come out in this game. Obviously, Tioga has the advantage, like I said, of being at home. They're coming off of a bye week. They're an extremely good football team. But we talked about, what happens to you in week 10, and do you want that bye week? All right, for like OCS, we talked about them kind of getting it handed to them a little bit in week 10. They get the bye week. Tioga also kind of got it handed to them by Franklin Parish in week 10. So were they a team that wished they didn't get the bye so that they could get back on the field, or did they really need the bye? And obviously only they can answer that question. But that's an interesting matchup, because Tioga plays 4A all year long, and now they're in the Division I playoff, which Division I is a gauntlet, starting from the very beginning. You don't even have to wait till the quarters in this bracket for it to be tough. It starts right away. Obviously, John Curtis and STM is a really fun one. STM is another team that plays 4A, a 4A schedule. Bumps up to Division I for the playoffs, along with 2-seeded Turlings. Mikey Corville, obviously a dream season for the Turlings Rebels. Now they'll face that Bonneville team that you were talking about earlier. St. Thomas More, John Curtis is just an awesome playoff matchup that we're getting really, really early. One that we don't really get to see, because obviously St. Thomas More is bumped up in the playoffs. And so you don't get to see a lot of John Curtis and STM facing off. But 2 teams with obviously a ton of history. I don't have to bore you with the John Curtis history. I really feel like that's just kind of a waste of time to even bring up. But St. Thomas More, 5 state titles, all in the split era. They have actually, if I'm not wrong, I'm gonna make sure I'm right here. They've won more state titles in the split era than John Curtis has.
Yeah.
Obviously playing in a lower division. But still, the consistency of those 2 programs, if you were to make a top 10 every year of best teams in Louisiana, regardless of class, there's 2 teams are probably on it every year, STM and John Curtis. So that's a really, really fun matchup that you don't even have to wait till Thanksgiving to get.
I do make a top. I usually try and do a top 50 regardless of classification, which at a certain point becomes really just a ton of toss-ups. And every year, though, these are certainly 2 teams that are among that, whether it be a given year of being that top kind of elite tier, or that next one that is still state championship caliber. Those are 2 teams that are right there in the top 10. I don't know that I've ever had them lower than like top 15 in like a down year, which is a little bit crazy. But some of these matchups are an awful lot of fun. I saw that Bonneville team for the first time this season and was really impressed with that defense. I think watching the way that they got after Riverdale's quarterback had to bring that much bigger of a smile to Andre Anthony to watch his guys be able to be as disruptive as they were, looking like young hymns, essentially. So that's going to be interesting to watch them against the Turlings O-line that I like an awful lot. And now you get, two first-year head coaches there in a second-round matchup, and somebody's heading on to the quarters. The Curtis and STM matchup, as you mentioned, two great teams year in, year out. Curtis has a young but really poised quarterback that has been through some battles now at this point, certainly going through that Catholic League grind. STM has one of the top, if not the top, senior quarterback in the state from a prospect and recruiting standpoint. And we've seen him in some key moments this season where things don't necessarily look like they're going great, be able to respond and lead that team back to some big victories. And so having to go on the road to New Orleans is not going to be, I think, anything that he or the Cougars shy away from. So much obviously experience there with Cole Bergeron and that senior class, but also just, the tradition of that program. They're ready to go anywhere they go. Tioga and Rummel, the dynamic is so interesting to me with Tioga. That loss to Franklin Parish we mentioned was a shootout style game where they were trying to keep up with a Franklin Parish team that was putting up a lot of points. And now you play a Rummel who is going to be kind of the polar opposite of that and going to grind on you, and has an O-line that I love a ton and always very defensively minded. Coach Nick Monica and company do a great job down there with the Raiders, making it really, really tough for anybody to put up many points against them, when Tioga would like to, I think, be in a little bit faster pace and high scoring type setup. And then just kind of finishing up the bottom half of the bracket, at least, Acadiana St. Aug. I think a lot of folks look at St. Aug as the biggest threat to come out of the bottom half of this bracket, but the Acadiana team that I watched on Friday compared to the Acadiana team I watched earlier this season was night and day. And I think a credit to those guys for sticking with it through an 0-3 start and not splintering at that time, but kind of galvanizing and getting to the point where they look more like Acadiana at this time of year. They get Travis Gallion back into the fold. They've got him and Colin DeBetta and Tyler Martina and company now playing two ways. And so some of their best athletes that are typically offensive guys, they're giving some run on defense, and now will make an interesting athletic matchup with some of what St. Aug can do with a really deep receiving core, and Vashon Coulon leading that offense. I think that's going to be has the chance to be maybe a more fun matchup than folks would expect, based on where Acadiana started this season at least. But we'll see, because St. Aug's been rolling against everyone who isn't in the car.
You know what? One of the things that really sucks as a high school football coach is when you run into somebody that runs the split back veer. And only two teams that I know of that run the split back veer in Louisiana are John Curtis and Acadiana. All right. But what's interesting about this dynamic is normally when you see that offense, you've never seen that. You haven't seen that offense all year because nobody does it. But what's interesting here, Jared, in this dynamic is that St. Aug played John Curtis and St. Thomas More played Acadiana. And both of those teams won that game. STM beat Acadiana and Aug beat Curtis. But now you're playing another team that runs the split back veer. So, yes, you've seen it before, which is a huge benefit. This year, I took my freshman at Catholic High over to Acadiana on 2 days' notice because we had an opening late in the season to go play Acadiana, and it was the only game we lost all year. But, man, the amount of people that were like, oh, my God, it's so good that you showed the kids the veer before, they see it again when they're juniors in the playoffs. And I told them that after the game. I was like, man, you don't know how big of a thing that is that you've seen this offense now, as opposed to never seeing it before. And so, when you look at Acadiana and Curtis being the only teams that really run this offense, it's so weird. You never see a team draw them in the playoffs that has seen it before without playing them. And so, obviously, there's a little bit of difference between the way Curtis and Acadiana do it, but it's basically the same offense. And it is annoying to coach against, and it is so hard to stop. because there are plays where you're like, oh, we stuffed him. Wait, he got 4. How did he get 4 yards? I thought we stuffed him. And like it'll look like you stuffed him. It's just because they were getting 7, 8, and 9. And then when you stuff them for 4, it feels so good. But you're like, wait, they still got 4 yards. And so the dynamic of AUG and STM seeing these offenses already is a huge benefit for both of those schools. STM pulled out a really tight win over Acadiana. AUG kind of handled Curtis, 55-28. But now obviously you're facing a team who does the same offense, but they obviously have their own spin on things. It's never identical. Whenever you face any type of double wing or wishbone or any type of these older, more old school offenses. But it is a huge benefit to have seen it before. In 2023, we ended up facing Acadiana in the state championship, and they had upset a really good Carr team the week before in the semis because obviously, hey, we don't see this offense very often. And, like, how do you slow down a team like Carr with so much speed, so much athleticism? Well, you run the veer right at him and lean on him for 4 quarters, and you win a war. And so, obviously, you would assume the strategies for Curtis and Acadiana will be very similar this week in those respective games against AUG and St. Thomas More, is to really just lean on their opponent and do what they do well. If you get those teams, though, behind the sticks, that's how you win. That's how you win those games. If you make them have to convert 3rd and longs, that's when they're more likely to put the ball on the ground. And so that's really kind of the blueprint for AUG and St. Thomas More this week. But the benefit of seeing it before can't be understated.
And I think that 2023 semifinal that Acadiana went through, which, I mean, some of the guys on this team, whether it be Darius McKinley as a senior, Colin DeBetta, who was a freshman that was playing already at that point as a junior now, that experience in 23 against Carr, I think, is one that gives them some confidence to potentially go out to New Orleans and upset a St. Aug team because they feel like they've been in a similar situation where there's a highly touted and high-flying Catholic League team that they have to deal with, and they're able to kind of assert their will enough to come away with a win. And for Curtis, we mentioned they lost that game to AUG in week 10. They lost to Carr in week 9, but both those games, I think turnovers just cost them more than we had seen be the case throughout this season. And so if they can take care of the ball, it's obviously a much different story in those games potentially and just on any given Friday night. And so it'll be interesting to see what STM's defense can do. I mean, in terms of slowing down Curtis, but also if they can come away with a key takeaway or two here or there, that can swing that thing dramatically. We'll see how it all goes. The top half of the bracket, and I don't know how much of this is because you're here and how much of it is because I have a Catholic BR following in general or whatever, but we have several comments that are just kind of back and forth about Shreve and their potential to come still put up points against Catholic versus folks saying Catholic is just too strong defensively and you're not going to be seeing anything close to that 61 points they put up against Hammond this past week. And so that's one that is certainly highlighted some of the comments. Alexandra, Brother Martin, I mentioned is a matchup that we've seen in recent playoffs. And so there's a level of familiarity and those two programs, maybe despite not historically seeing each other a ton, probably not loving each other a whole lot this time of year when they keep running into each other in second round and quarterfinal playoff matchups. St. Paul's, the 9 seed, goes up to Evangel Christian, who has been as high flying and high scoring as anyone in the state, save for a trip down to Lafayette Christian. But I think we talked about this some in the bracket release reactions last week, but St. Paul's is a really interesting matchup to me for that Evangel team. And I think folks should take the Wolves pretty seriously heading up there. We'll see how it all plays out on Friday, but a clash of styles and styles make fights and all those things. And I think the Wolves, are a battle-tested team that'll be interesting for the Eagles to face. And then obviously a Catholic League rematch of Edna Carr and Jesuit at the top of the bracket. Did not go great for my alma mater, the Blue Jays, last time around. And that's kind of the case for everyone this season that has had to deal with Carr. But now the Blue Jays get a second shot at them heading over to the West Bank to play at Old Berman Stadium, now Morris Jeff Stadium for the Cougars. I mean, kind of big takeaways for the second round, the top half of D1 Select.
Man, like you said, it hasn't gone well for anybody against Carr this year yet. One thing, we don't have time machines. I'd love to go back and see that American Heritage game again if Heritage had that top receiver healthy. They were missing arguably their best player, wide receiver that's highly recruited. I don't know the Florida recruits as well as I do the Louisiana guys.
They were down their top two quarterbacks. I mean, they were really banged up in that game.
Yeah. And so, ends up being a huge win for Carr, a national win. The kind of national schedule that I think Carr would like to play a lot of those early season games against if they could. St. Paul Evangel, like you said, the styles are going to be very, very different. St. Paul's has a very, hey, I'm going to hit you in the face. And Evangel has the, hey, I'm going to try to score 1 million points. And so very, very different. I've watched a little bit of both of these teams on film, just kind of some crossover with opponents and stuff. Not a ton of both, but that Evangel 9-yard shotgun is not dead. It is still very much alive. It's like they only pull it out, though. They don't pull it out right away. Like, they'll line up very conservative with Pop in the 5-yard traditional shotgun, and then he just kind of, like, inches back as the game goes on. And so, man, just giving himself a lot of time to just pick you apart. That's going to be interesting. Like, that's one of those games, like, hey, is it going to be like Lafayette Christian where it's 24-22? Or is it going to be like when Evangel plays, let's say, an airline or something, and it's going to be like 60-56? Like, it's a weird that's a really interesting game to just kind of look at in advance of, like, who's going to make their style dictate the game. Because I feel like even if St. Paul's dictates the style, Evangel could still win. And even if Evangel dictates the style, St. Paul's could still win. And so it's going to be a really interesting thing of who dictates the style, but who dictates the way the game goes. And so I think either way, either team could come away with that one. Obviously, that's a long trip from Covington up to Shreveport. Obviously, Rodney Duron Field is a beautiful facility. They got turf there a couple of years ago. It's all sitting out there on the back of campus. Campus is pitch black except for this big beam of light all the way on the back. Evangel has to have one of the biggest campuses, maybe the biggest campus of any high school in the state. Like, I don't know when's the last time you went up there, but, like, when you really think about the fact that they sit on like 6 acres or something like that, it's just insane. So it's a really, really cool high school atmosphere. I haven't been out there in a really long time. But long trip for the Wolves. But like you said, man, like, this game's a real toss up. There's two styles that are very, very different. Who dictates the style, like I said, but who dictates who's heading to Morris Jeff the following week is really going to be the question there.
This is, I mean, certainly that much longer of a trip, but St. Paul's went, or no, my bad. I was about to say St. Paul's went to Tioga 2 years ago, but that was actually a home game for St. Paul. So I'm not even sure. I'd have to go back and look a little bit more at the last time St. Paul's had a road trip that long and was successful on a long road trip come playoff time. Coincidentally, the last time I was on campus at Evangel was the day that Pop Houston transferred to Evangel from Calvary. Just coincidentally, I was up there for a Thursday night Calvary game against the aforementioned Captain Shreve Gators, and then stopped at Evangel on the way out of town to interview a few guys, including Gabe Relaford, who's at LSU now. And then, on the way back to Baton Rouge was being told that Pop was heading to Evangel. So just interesting timeline dynamics to mention, but we'll be, again, I'm saying it for every bracket, but some fun matchups in the second round that will be really interesting to watch. There's some potential here to have some of these seeds be shaken up a little bit in some spots. I don't know that we get a ton of upsets seed wise in the second round here, but there's going to be some challenges, and I expect we won't have chalk heading into the quarterfinals. I think we'll have an upset or two. The Division I non-select bracket to wrap this thing up. Westgate with a really emphatic win against Airline, 49-14 in the 16-17 matchup. down there in New Iberia. Westgate takes care of business in a big way. One of the wilder finishes, and a game that I don't know that going into it had the state's attention quite as much as it certainly has coming out of it. But Terrebonne, the 9 seed, holds off Natchitoches Central, the 24 seed, 27-24. Southside gets a big 52-14 win over Prairieville. Central 52-24 over Dutchtown in a rematch of some notable recent playoff history. East Ascension 57-17 over West Washita. So a huge game for Bryson Martinez and company down there in Gonzales to move on and set up a game, a big Baton Rouge area game against Central Baton Rouge in the second round. Zachary 48-15 over Salmon sets up an old pre-district shakeup, what would have been a district rematch. A lot of history between these two programs. Zachary and Denham Springs facing in the second round. Washita Parish holds off Sanoma in the 14-19 game, 24-21 final. Washita will come down this way and face Destrehan in the second round. Hahnville 52-39 over Slidell advances to face Parkway, which beat Covington 51-30. We talked about it briefly earlier, but Barb, the 26 seed, 49-21 upset over Northwood Shreveport. West Monroe with a 49-21 win over South Lafourche advances and will host Barb this week. And Mandeville gets a road win at Thibodaux, 48-21 advances to face Neville in the second round. So look at some of those. I imagine there's a chance you're going to start with that Terrebonne Natchitoches Central game, but what caught your eye most of these first round games in D1 non-select?
Man, so like you said, and you and I touched on this before we hit record here, was I want to highlight what an effort by Natchitoches Central, to go down from Natchitoches all the way to Terrebonne. So Natchitoches Central took a sack with like 13 seconds left, no timeouts, ran their field goal team onto the field and couldn't get the snap off in time. So they ended up losing in overtime. And so obviously a very short field goal. I think it was about an extra point or so distance. So obviously that's a heartbreaker for Natchitoches Central. But, once the dust settles, once they're able to, really kind of just look back on the season, I'm sure their coaching staff's going to be extremely proud of the strides that they made, the effort that their boys showed. So Terrebonne survives. Westgate does the opposite of survive. They dominate the Airline Vikings. Westgate does in round one. Not your typical 16-17 result, 49-14. I think some of those some of those questionable defenses you see in North Louisiana in the 5A level, one of them got exposed, on Friday night in a game where they weren't able to match the points. You and I have talked a lot about District 1 5A this year. In a lot of those games, when they run into somebody that won't let them score at will, it obviously gets really, really tough. And so you have a situation here where Westgate, who's one of the most physically gifted teams probably year in and year out as far as just athletes go, gets a big win over Airline. Southside, Jess Curtis keeps doing Jess Curtis things. Which is running for 1,000,000 yards and scoring a whole bunch of points. And now that sets up a really, really fun 8-9 matchup, an offense that Terrebonne probably hasn't seen this year, if I had to guess. Another one of those things like we talked about with the Division I select bracket. Obviously, Southside runs a different style option offense than those other teams that we talked about, but obviously one that you don't see a ton, especially one run at a very high level. Man, Central East Ascension, how awesome is this for the Baton Rouge area to have a matchup like this in the second round of the playoffs? Two teams playing really good ball right now. Coach David Semino and Coach Brock Mathern both having very, very good seasons. Coach Semino and them coming off of a state championship. Coach Mathern just working to get EA continually pointing their arrow up. And now he has an opportunity to take a very short bus ride. Well, it depends on how the traffic is. It's always a crapshoot. But as far as mileage goes, not a very long trip. And that creates a really, really fun matchup here in our area. And then you talk about our area again, man, Denham Springs and Zachary, usually if they were playing in the playoffs, you'd see these seeds flipped. You'd see Zachary being the top 5 seed and Denham maybe being in the teens. But the script has been flipped this year. Denham had an incredible run through that really, really competitive District 5A. Zachary has some bumps along the way in district play after playing a very, very tough non-district schedule that included Acadiana, who we talked a lot about. You talk about, like, we talk a lot about these kids that have just done this a lot. Like, Denham's the 4 seed, Zachary's the 13, but those Zachary kids have played in a lot of really big games, like this senior class has. And so the experience is definitely going to be a benefit for Coach David Brewerton and his guys. But, man, there's probably not very many coaches in Louisiana that their kids play as hard for him than Brett Beard at Denham Springs. And so, like, this is going to be a slugfest, man. Like, these two teams, if I'm not wrong, I think these two teams played in the spring game.
Yeah, they definitely played in the offseason. I couldn't remember if it was a scrimmage or the spring.
I think it was the spring, and obviously that, in terms of right now, was a million years ago. These are two completely different teams than played in, middle of May in a game that was obviously very controlled. But this is a really fun matchup. You go down to that 3-14 matchup. Ouachita, the best 14 seed maybe in the history of Louisiana high school football. They have 4 district losses. 3 of them are by a combined 15 points in a just meat grinder of District 2-5A. And we'll talk about a lot of teams from that district throughout the playoffs. Not an easy 14-3 matchup for the Destrehan Wildcats. Now, granted, Ouachita does have to make a long trip down to Destrehan, which is a hard place to play. I've been down there as a coach. I've been down there as a little brother in the playoffs with Evangel back in the day, where I'm pretty sure Evangel set the record for most penalty flags in the history of football. So that's a really tough place to go play. But, this is a really good Ouachita Lions team. And so I expect this one to be a tough one for Destrehan. Obviously, they have advantages of being a very, very good program, being at home, being the top 3 seed. But Ouachita is not going to just give it to them. This is going to be a game that's going to have to be earned by Destrehan. Parkway and Hahnville, a couple of high-scoring games for both teams in the first round. 52-39 over Slidell for Hahnville, 51-30, like you mentioned, for Parkway over Covington. And now Hahnville has to make a really long trip up to Bossier City. This is going to be another one that's really interesting because Parkway's kind of prided themselves on their defense for most of the year. Obviously, they've had some run-ins with Pop Houston and some games that maybe didn't go their way defensively. They gave up 30 last week in a win. And so this Hahnville team obviously can score a lot of points. Hahnville plays in a highly competitive district themselves with Destrehan, with Thibodaux, with Terrebonne. If I'm not mistaken, I think all of those are still together, if I'm not wrong. Like another game that has a potential to be a shootout. And then that 7-26 matchup, like you mentioned, kind of the litmus test so far that we've seen as far as one of those 4A schools playing up in the playoffs in Northwood, who has a very, very good season. I think the only blemishes on Northwood's record were Loyola and North Dakota, who are the 1 and 2 seed in the Division II brackets, select and non-select. But, hey, they run into a team in Barb who has bigger numbers than they do. Barb with a lot of history, some trips to the state championship game, obviously more known for their baseball program, but can play some football, man. They have a tremendous running game this year. And so Barb goes up there and takes care of business, and now Barb gets to go right back to the other side of North Louisiana and play in honestly one of the toughest places to play in the entire state at Rebel Stadium. It's a stadium that I have been to what feels like 20 times as a coach and a little brother, as I mentioned earlier. Really tough place to go play. West Monroe and Barb have history. They played for a state championship way back when, which we say way back when, but it's just way back when for us because we watch a lot of games throughout each season, and so it feels like it was forever ago. But I believe it was only, let's see, if I'm not mistaken here, West Monroe and Barb. Oh man, split era. 14-0 Productions. I might have to fire up the championship game part there. But anyway, like two teams obviously that have had some run-ins in the past in the playoffs. None of these kids obviously were on those teams. Some of them may not have been alive yet. And then at the bottom, Mandeville gets a huge win over Thibodeau. Another coach that fell short in round one that I want to highlight is Lowell Narcisse and the job he did at Thibodeau in his first year, coming from Ascension Catholic, where he had done a really good job. And Mandeville gets the best of Thibodeau there, but obviously Coach Narcisse and them boys will be back. Mandeville has to make it's been a common theme of just long trips. Mandeville has to go up to Neville, who's coming off of a bye after they had a really big win over a really good Ash team in Week 10, a game that they kind of dictated. But now you're looking at a matchup between the Skippers and the Neville Tigers. Obviously, nobody wants to see Neville right now with the way they're playing after the way that they survived District 2 5A and win that thing after going through playing some of the best teams in the state. And so now we're looking at, a collision course of Neville West Monroe in the quarters in a rematch. And those District 2 5A games none of them were lopsided between those top four teams. You're talking about like every time that Ruston, Neville, West Monroe, and Ash played, I mean, it was, hey, who has the ball last? That's probably who won. And so the potential of West Monroe and Neville facing off again in the quarterfinals would be pretty fun, especially for those of us like me that have no dog in the fight and just want to see a good football game.
That Neville team is, and also just to I went back and looked for the West Monroe and Barb history, and the last time that those two met in the playoffs was 2017 quarterfinal, and that was just the last of, as you mentioned, a lot of postseason history between those two. But that Neville team is who I ended up picking as my prediction to come out of this bracket as state champions. But honestly, the biggest pause for me there was the fact that they could have to face West Monroe a second time after surviving in a close one over at Rebel Stadium, Don Childs Field at Rebel Stadium just a few weeks ago, in one that I think West Monroe feels like they let get away from them and would be chomping at the bit for another opportunity at Neville. But you mentioned the long trip that Mandeville will have to take to Neville in the second round. Same sort of thing for Barb up to West Monroe. Both those places super tough to play. Coming out of that Alexandria game in Week 10, Coach Bachman mentioned he thought that the atmosphere kind of affected his guys, and that it hurt them, that there were a lot of pre-snap penalties and all those things that played into the Trojans just kind of being behind the sticks in some spots, and having to overcome themselves in some spots on top of a fast, physical Neville defense and team overall. So that's one of those matchups that I think, like we talked about at the very beginning of this show, for us, I think we looked at the bracket right away and said, man, a West Monroe Neville quarterfinal potential there. And so you hope that those kids are doing a good job of not looking ahead to, hey, we could have a quarterfinal against our Cross River rivals, because that's where things get tricky and you drop a game earlier than you should. Wanted to mention that Barb team in particular. That was a big upset that I picked going into the first round because of watching what they had done in some late season games. And you mentioned the running game and some of the history of success there for Barb as a football program and baseball program and all those things. They've got a junior running back, Jordan Griffin, who's an LSU baseball commit, who had 6 touchdowns and like 270 yards in that upset of Northwood, after having 6 touchdowns and like 300 yards in Week 10 against Sam Houston. So in terms of dudes having the biggest Novembers possible in the state, Jordan Griffin deserves a shout out for like 600 yards and 12 touchdowns in an 8-day span. Parkway Hanville, that's one that I may have our guy Jacob Colton at. I told him circle that one as a potential second round matchup in Shreveport to go catch. Destrehan Washita is a game that I might be at for the second straight postseason, because there are some super talented kids on both those teams, and those are two teams that I think have the potential to make deep playoff runs, if not be, depending on how some things happen in this bracket, possibly making a trip to the Dome. I know both those teams have had that circled as a goal of theirs this year. I think Destrehan, Ouachita, and then that Zachary Denham are the two that are kind of the top of my list that I'm trying to decide between right now. And we have a lot of folks talking about that one in here. I guess both of those games, really. Thanks to everyone who's tuning in. Darren, who's been great all show. William Stutzenbecker saying great work, guys. Appreciate y'all all for tuning in. SU Jag 20, who was with us last week as well, talking about, how would these seeds maybe look different if Denham played Zachary's schedule and vice versa. Currently, Denham is the highest seed that it's ever had in the program's history, going back to the start of the seeding, more than 2 decades ago. Glenn Harrison here mentioned something unique to Zachary. They have 43 seniors on this team. They've been through some battles, certainly just this year, some ups and downs. I mean, they placed a really tough schedule, but they have guys that have been through some battles for years now, year in and year out. And so that's a really interesting matchup to me. 2 teams that we mentioned before have a lot of familiarity, and Denham has been on a, I think, 6-game win streak since letting one get away from them against EA. And talking to Coach Fournier, OC over there, or quarterback coach for the Yellow Jackets, he said that from that game and a little scuffle that happened afterward, that their guys really galvanized and have been more together than they were prior to that. And you've seen it play out on the field, certainly with these last several games. They haven't lost a game since late September right now, and get home field advantage against the Zachary team. But that one will be a lot of fun. Saw someone ask about when we talked about Coach Curtis for Southside. Yeah, that's Jess Curtis. That was at Manny just a few years ago and had all that success. He's in his 2nd season at Southside. And this is a team that was looked at going into the year as one that had really big potential and has lived up to that largely. Huge win against Karen Crone week 9, battled Acadiana to I think it was a 3-point game a week prior to that. And so a lot of talent there. And then, Rustin Westgate, great one, so on.
So Denham Springs, since that EA loss, their tightest margin of victory since then was 18 points. And that was against Dutchtown in week 7. They have won 41-14 over Southern Labs, 63-34 over Live Oak, 42-24 over Dutchtown, 51-13 over a good Prairieville team, 62-34 over Walker, and 54-26 over Santa Maula. So, something woke the Jackets up after that EA loss.
Yeah, it did.
And they haven't even had a close game since then. They've been just handling their business. And now they're in a situation where, hey, somebody's got to come to us. One of these teams. And here's the thing, Jarrett, this, living in the area, we both live in the area. There are so many high schools around here that when you have to play certain schools, you feel like everybody just assumes you're out of it because of who you're having to play. We got to play Catholic, we got to play Zachary, we got to play Central, or in recent years, whatever it might be. We got to play Southern Lab or U High. But you're in a situation now where, as Denham, yes, you're playing Zachary with their 42 seniors who have been through a ton, but they're coming to you. You're the higher seed. They have to come out to Livingston Parish, and they've got to make, now granted it ain't a long trip, all right, but they've got to be the one to get on a bus and come to your place. And so that's just a huge deal, I think, for Brett Beard, that school, that staff, that community, to be the one hosting this big game as the higher seed. Not because you pulled an upset, now you get to host. You are the aggressor. You are the top 4 seed. And so I know that means a ton to the Yellow Jacket faithful. And real quick, I looked it up. Barb beat West Monroe in the semi back in 2012. It was not the Dome, 49-48. So Barb made their Dome trip back in 2012, before most of their kids were, out of diapers. So it's been a while for Barb, but it's a good Barb team, like you said. LSU baseball commit Every time he probably gets hit toting the rock, Jay Johnson probably winces just a little bit. Hey, but Jay Johnson's crazy. He might love that he's got to commit playing tailback in the playoffs, man, this bracket is just like we've looked at some others. Like this bracket's only going to get better. Every quarterfinal matchup next week is going to be can't miss. Like you could almost just, put all these quarterfinals in a hat, pick one, and go, and it'd be a good decision. This bracket is loaded like it always does. You are guaranteed to have another BR matchup in the quarters, whether it be Denham or Zachary winning or EA Central winning. You're gonna have a district matchup potentially, rematch in the quarters, or you're just gonna have maybe an old district matchup, maybe just a Baton Rouge. And here's the thing, Jared, as you know, like even if say Denham plays Central, two teams that aren't in the same bracket, they did play or district. They did play already this year, and that's a team that's a huge rivalry that we lost for a couple of years that we got back in recent years. And all these kids know each other. They all grew up playing AAU against each other and baseball with each other, traveling. And they played, in little Zachary Elite football, or they played for the little Central Wildcats or whatever it is. Like all four of those schools know each other so well. And so you're guaranteed to have a matchup next week in the quarters of two schools that really, really know each other well. And also, like I said, the potential of a Neville West Monroe rematch. There's just a lot of familiarity when you get to playoff brackets like this in Division I, whether it be old playoff matchups, whether it be old district matchups, current district matchups, rematches, whatever it might be. Once you get to the quarters, there's really not a lot of mystery. Like these teams know each other.
I am so looking forward to this week. That is already tough to figure out where I'm going to head to. And William Stutzenbecker asked where I'm at this week. And I think the two that I've kind of zeroed in on are that Zachary and Denham matchup or Destrehan and Ouachita, which weirdly, I haven't seen any of those four teams this regular season. The most recent I've seen any of them was Destrehan in the preseason scrimmage. So it's been months now. And they, I think, have shown with some of these outcomes that they're a much different looking team than what they were in like mid-August or whatever it was. And that is a rematch from, again, last year's playoffs. And it's a Ouachita Parish team that is a really capable 14 seed there. But then there's so much to that 13-4 Zachary Denham matchup as we've talked about so much. It's really tough to choose between those two.
If you think this week's tough,
and exactly quarterfinals, I think starting the playoffs, I looked at what I thought would be the quarterfinal matchups and felt like out of 32 quarters around the state that I would happily be at like 22 or 24 of them or whatever it is. And all of those matchups are still very much alive and well. I didn't lose any quarterfinalists in the first round from my prediction stuff. So yeah, as torn as I am this week, I'm going to be a wreck next week trying to realize the games I'm not going to be able to be at.
Well, I hope that where I'm at is decided for me for the next 3 weeks. But I can't imagine being in your shoes. You're basically, you can't go wrong with any of these quarterfinal potential matchups. Like I said, put them all in a hat and pick one and get in your car, and it's going to be a good choice.
Thank you again to everyone that joined. I mean, it seems like a lot of you guys have been here through the long haul, and it has been a long haul. And so thanks so much for checking it out, for commenting, for sharing all those things. Certainly appreciate all the support we can get on Louisiana versus all y'all and for Chance on Louisiana Football Report. Appreciate U.S. Army 2A for saying he just subscribed. Make sure you do that. I mean, subscribe to the Louisiana versus all y'all channel, follow on all the social media, go check out Chance's work on Louisiana Football Report as well. Does a great job keeping tabs on everything happening around the state. And there is a lot going on right now to keep tabs of. So appreciate you for taking some time on a Sunday night, as always, during playoff time to talk about all of it. And if you want to part on your traditional reference to get out to these dang games, folks, I'll let you leave it with that.
Again, I'll mention you can watch Love is Blind on reruns or whatever it is, whatever terrible reality show that you are currently hooked to. There's no good movies out right now because I've looked. I've already looked to see, hey, what can I do with my 4-year-old on Thanksgiving week when she's out of school to keep her entertained? There's no good movies out right now. Wherever you want to go have Friday night dinner, go at 5. All right, and then get your butt out to these games. We just ran through every reason why you should go. We told you about the kids, the coaches, the communities. They work harder at this than they've really worked at anything in their lives so far, and they deserve a packed house. It was so cool. I went to a playoff game last Friday, and you see the home side is packed to the gills. You see the visitor side's basically empty, and that's so sad for those kids. Like the kids deserve better. Like you ain't whatever you got planned. It's a terrible decision. Like get up, go watch these games, go support these kids. They deserve it. Not just the kids, but hey, the student trainers, the band, the dance teams, the cheerleaders. Like they put in months waiting for right now. Mid to late November is what it's all about. And you have nothing better to do. I promise you. So get up and go to some of these games.
Shoot, sometimes you see the spirit squads crying more after the playoff loss than the teams, because it is huge for everybody involved, everyone that puts everything into this. As Chance said, be out there on Friday night for these great games all over the state. We only have 4 weeks left of high school football in Louisiana, and so I'm looking forward to watching a lot of movies at some point, but I've pretty much just kind of bookmark those for figuring that out more around Christmas time. Go check out some of these games on Friday night, and we'll be back here next week to talk about what took place in all these games this coming Friday in the second round, as well as what will be guaranteed to be a fantastic quarterfinal slate on Thanksgiving weekend. So until next time, y'all be well. Again, he's Chance Hester of Louisiana Football Report. I'm Jarrett Roser of Louisiana Versus. All y'all, appreciate y'all for tuning in. Take it easy.